This is Join Us in France, episode 572. 572. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we take a conversational journey through the beauty, culture, and flavors of France. Today, I bring you a conversation with Elyse Rivin of Toulouse Guided Walks about the tragic, brilliant life of Vincent van Gogh. Discover the man behind the masterpieces, his struggles, his artistic breakthroughs, and the deep sadness that shaped his iconic works. From dark beginnings to the vibrant colors of Arles, this episode reveals why Van Gogh's art still moves us today, a must-listen for art lovers and dreamers alike. This podcast is fueled by chocolatine, coffee, and the generosity of listeners like you. You book itinerary consults, take my voice map tours in Paris, hop in my electric car for a day trip around Toulouse, or chip in on Patreon, and I'm very grateful to have all of you helping me out. Want to keep me going and skip the ads? There's a link for that in the show notes. You'll find everything at joinusinfrance.com/boutique and merci. Bootcamp 2026 is sold out. If you'd like to be put on the waiting list, just in case some people drop out, email me, Annie@joinusinfrance.com. The waiting list is also first come, first serve, so don't wait. There will not be a magazine part of the podcast today because this recording ran long, but I could not stop Elyse on such a beautiful story. But I do want to send my thanks and a shout out to new patrons, Paula Ford and Dale B, and to all of my patrons, really. I'll be posting quite a bit to Patreon in late November because I'll be off on a long drive through France. But, shh, I'll tell you more about that next week. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
What a fun topic we have today. We're going to talk about Vincent van Gogh or Van Gogh.
Van Gogh, yeah.
So I will say it once correctly. Van Gogh. I'm done saying it correctly.
And so Van Gogh is the English way, Van Gogh is the Dutch way, and the French Van Gogh.
Van Gogh.
Yeah, and when I said that to my husband, he went, "It's Van Gogh." I said, "No, Gogh to you. No, it's not Van Gogh. No.
So we have our own ways of saying things, but I've had a couple of people actually email me to tell me that I'm usually very careful about language and how careless of me not to say Van Gogh properly every single time. And it's just because I'd have to think about it. And sometimes when I'm talking about what I want to say and not how I want to say it. Anyway,
But I think it's also, honestly, there are certain sounds that come from other languages. I don't know if we're always required to be able to pronounce them the way they would be pronounced in that language, I mean,
that is a good point.
it's not that easy, I allow you to say it the way you want,
And also, he spent a lot of time in France. The man was honorary French, I guess.
He was honorary French, yes. In fact, on the notes, that's why I put down French artist, ? Dutch artist? No, universal artist, I think.
You're right. He was beloved everywhere.
Yeah, but it is true. And I think that's what makes it sort of interesting on one level, is that people do associate him with France, even though almost everyone who knows anything about him knows that, in fact, he was Dutch.
Right.
And in his very sadly short life, since he died at the age of 37, he spent He spent a total of not quite 5 years in France. But he was very much a traveler in the sense that he never stayed in one place for very long. And one of the things that I hadn't realized until I was doing background information on him was how much he was restless, and he spent part of his life in Holland, of course, and part in England, which he loved, part in Belgium, and then, of course, the last part of his life in France,
Right. He died in France.
He died in France, and of course, he's buried in France. And we'll mention a little bit of some of the things you can go to visit that are in connection with him. So my first question to you, Annie, is why do you think he's so famous?
I'm not sure, but I think his paintings, especially the ones that have later years and that are very famous, such as Starry Night, are just a universal image. Like everybody knows the paintings he did of sunflowers, which I don't even know the names of some of those. But, that's the picture you have in your head is either the starry night without the deep blue or sunflowers. And I think it speaks to us. Like it just, I don't know, it's universally beautiful.
Okay. I mean, this is really the kinds of questions that I find really fascinating to ask. And, of course, I spend time doing visits to museums with people, and I'm always just curious to see how people react to different works of art and why. And it is one of the things that's the reason I put down the list of questions is because he is an artist who is loved by, I would say, 90% of the people who look at his work. There are always a few who don't appreciate it. And I was thinking about it because, of course, I do know his work really well, but I was curious thinking, what is it about his work that people adore him so much? Because people flood the section of the Orsay Museum where he is. If you go to Amsterdam, you have to buy tickets well in advance to get into this museum that is just devoted to him alone. And I had the privilege years and years ago when I was still living back in New York. There was a huge retrospective of his work, and I was at the time temporarily working in one of the sections of the museum. And so I got the privilege, which will never happen again in my life, of walking through the exhibit after hours when nobody was there. And it was just one of the most remarkable experiences, just standing there all by myself looking at some of these paintings.
He used such striking colors, and they haven't aged. It's like, when you do photography, you can retouch your pictures, right? And sometimes you fix the white balance or something like that, and it makes a tremendous difference. On some photos, it doesn't help that much, but on some, it really, really helps. And I think he had a knack for finding the right tone of yellow, the right tone of blue, the right tone of green. I think especially in his later years.
Yeah.
There were times when his paintings looked kind of dull and dreary.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times when they looked very happy and just contemplative of the beauty around him.
Yeah, well, it is a fact that, of course, that, he did literally switch to bright colors in the last few years of his life. What's fascinating is that most of the world knows his last works, the last few years, the last 2-3 years of his life, whereas it's only a part of what was a huge production. I mean, this is someone who died at the age of 37 and left over 2,000 works, drawings, watercolors, and paintings, because he, in his mental state, which was largely in a frenzy, unfortunately, a good part of his adult life, he produced at least one painting a day.
That is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. What was so amazing about him was that whatever was going on, unfortunately for him, inside his brain in terms of his angst and his depressions, he was clearly lucid and very, very sure of what he wanted to do about the painting. But it took him forever. It took him till over the age of 30 to really decide that that was what he wanted to do. And that was what makes his life so fascinating, because he condensed into what is basically an incredibly short life. There are only 2 or 3 other artists in the history of painting who are that famous for having lived such a short time. He did so many different things, and all of those things got incorporated into his brain and came out in the paintings that he did in the last few years. So I thought maybe we could start by talking a little bit about the beginning of his life, and then talk about what happened that made him the artist that we all know.
Very good. Very good.
So, of course, he was born in Holland in 1853. He was, in fact, the first child. He was actually the second child born. He was the first child to survive of an upper middle-class family that was a very famous family for several centuries, that was really part of the high bourgeoisie of Holland, that had art merchants in the family. So art was basically part of their existence. But also, and this is typical, of course, the Protestant countries of the North, there were pastors in the family. There was a family that was very involved in both the church, which was I'm not quite sure because I think it was Calvinistic. It's kind of complicated. But so in his family, there was a part of the family that was very much involved in the church and in being preachers, and part that was very successful as art merchants. And his uncles there was one branch in London and there was one branch of this family business in Paris, and they were really very, very famous. He wound up being the oldest of 6 surviving children. And of course, the one that he was the closest to was his youngest brother, Theodore, who we called Theo, who became his best friend and who basically gave him psychological and financial support all during his life.
Right.
But what happened, it's apparently nobody to this day really knows. I went online to look at all these things about what was wrong with him, what was his problem. He was depressive. He had some kind of what most people would say is now some kind of bipolarity. Nobody really knows. But unfortunately for him, even at the age of 6 or 7, he was showing signs of having a behavior that was not exactly normal, whatever that is. He was very silent, very withdrawn. He did not like being around other children. They tried to send him to a local school, and apparently it went so badly that his parents decided that they would do homeschooling. They hired a woman who was apparently a very good young teacher, and he and his sister, who was the next one after him, were homeschooled for several years. So he was in school for a couple of years, and then between the ages of 7 and 11 and a half, 12, he was simply homeschooled. And he apparently couldn't relate to other children. He was really not very good at the social contact. One of the things that happened, though, in his schooling was that they discovered he had a talent for languages because he learned English, which probably is easy to learn, honestly, if you're Dutch, and German and French. So he started learning all those languages as a little kid, and he had a lot of classes in drawing, and drawing was, in fact, something he did his entire life.
So in a way, a brilliant child that had difficulties coping with the real world.
Exactly.
There are a lot of kids like that.
Yeah. I mean, to this day, who knows what label we would put on it today, but that's exactly the perfect description of him. He was brilliant. He was highly oversensitive to a lot of things, but he could not cope with the real world, and any kind of emotional rejection, which is something that happened recurrently several times in his life in terms of dealing with women, set him spinning off into a major depression, major crisis. It was like he was probably autistic, I would say. It was one of these people who did not know how to relate to people,
It's true that, we know it in our own lives. We know people who go through a breakup and who cares? And,
Right.
they move on.
Right.
And you have people, it seems they never get over it. There are some people, they just can't get over the heartbreak that might have happened when they were 15 or when they were 20 or, There's stories in my family of women who never married because their fiancé died tragically and that she just never married after that. Yeah, crazy.
It is crazy, but I guess that it's hard to, well, let's just say that
That's how these people are. You can't, you don't choose that. It's just how you came out,
That's exactly. So poor Vincent, okay? At the age of 11 and a half, they decided to send him to overnight school. You can imagine what a catastrophe that was.
Yeah, because if you can't cope with regular school, overnight school is going to be very hard.
It's going to be very hard. He was apparently, picked on. I mean, you can just imagine the scenario. So at 13, he went home, and he stayed home between the ages of 13 and 16. I have no idea other than continuing his studies, whether he did anything. But at the age of 16, his parents forced him to leave. They actually forced him to leave. And they said, okay, since you know how to draw and you speak some English, we're going to send you to one of your uncles. The company was Goupil and Company. Now, that was the name of the art merchant's business that they had. And they sent him to The Hague, which, of course, Holland being so small, I have no idea how close it was to actually where he lived, because he was in Brabant, which is the southern part of Holland. So The Hague is in the southern part of Holland, The Hague. Now, we say The Hague. And he went to work for his uncle, and he actually enjoyed it. And he discovered painting. He had been drawing all of his childhood, but it was working with one of his uncles there that he actually discovered painting and, of course, learned a lot about Dutch painters, which, of course, there was certainly lots of them to look at. And he started doing some copying, which is a traditional, old-fashioned way for artists to learn. He never actually went to a formal art school at that time. And he learned about color and mixing colors. And he really seemed to enjoy what he was doing. And he began writing. And one of the things that's interesting is that this is the beginning of his writing. So we have this young guy who's between the ages of 16 and 20, works with members of the family in an art merchant's situation, who is learning about painting, about mixing colors, about artists, and who begins writing in his diaries, very intimate diaries, which are actually some of which are available to be read, and then begins talking about something that is the essence of who he is. That is, art for him is a spiritual activity.
Interesting.
And this is what happens. At the age of 20, because he's been so good working with his uncle in The Hague, his parents decide that it's time for him to go to another part of the company, and they sent him to London.
Wow, that's a big step.
It's a big step. And he's 20 years old. His English is very, very good. In fact, he was trilingual pretty much his whole life with French and Dutch. And various people described him as being happy for the first time in his life.
Oh, that's good.
He loved London. He loved England. He loved working in this other uncle's branch of the Goupil and Company. And everything would have been fine. At this point, he hasn't really any particular ambition to be an artist. He's just surrounded by art. But, and this is where we begin to see the fragility of his being, he falls in love.
Okay, that seems normal at age 20.
Exactly. Except that he falls in love with he's staying in a boarding house, which was apparently something very normal to do, in London. And he fell in love with the daughter of the people who had the boarding house.
Okay, that happened a lot, I'm sure, yeah.
Which is perfectly classical. If it was an English novel, it would be a wonderful story from their point. But she was not in love with him. And when he announced that he was in love with her, she basically told him that she was in love with somebody else, and it went and sent him off into a deep depression.
Yeah, that's not good.
It's not good. And so, unfortunately, it is the thing that tilts him into this situation where every time there's some kind of rejection from the outside world, he stops basically functioning. So what happens is, it sends him into a situation which is very interesting because I didn't know this, but it's a big chunk of what happened for the next few years of his life. He decides to seek solace in religion.
Yeah. And I know a little bit about this because wasn't his father a preacher?
It was a preacher part-time.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And so what happens is, because he's involved, I guess, with various, what would be evangelical churches in England, not the Church of England, which is very much close to Catholicism, he decides that he's going to stop working as an art merchant and become a preacher.
Well, that's a big change.
And he becomes obsessed with the Bible, which he reads over and over and over again. And he decides that he's going to study in one of the evangelical churches in England. There's lots of different ones that were, pretty much all over the place. But he loses his job because he's now not focusing on the work anymore. And he basically is sent by his family back to Holland. And he is now 21.
So in the course of a year, he went from being extremely happy to making a very abrupt decision to completely change his path in life.
Yeah.
And that doesn't go well. And so he goes home. Yeah, that's sad.
And he spends a good part of the next year trying to translate the Bible he had. And I don't know what it is because it's interesting. It doesn't mention which version it is, but he decides that whatever the version is that he has, that's the version he wants to translate into French and into German. And he becomes obsessed with this. And he's really obsessed with the religion. And he decides, so he tries to enroll in theology school in Holland. And he does enroll. But what happens is he can't deal with structure. So he fails the classes even in the theology school.
Well, and also there's a million translation of the Bible. Like, why do we need another one?
Well, I mean, you're talking about rationality, right? All right. So he fails. He goes to another theological school
To see if that one was going to.
and he fails that again. And so he decides he's going to be a lay preacher going around proselytizing. And his family starts to worry about him.
Well, yeah.
And he becomes so depressed that his family still trying to take care of him. And of course, he's now in his 20s, right?
Which is good because some families will say, oh, forget you. Like, no, they keep trying to.
They keep trying. Although his father is really starting to worry seriously about his mental state, and wondering if there's something else that they need to do. Now, we're talking about the 1870s into the 1880s. So how much knowledge is there of psychiatry? I have no idea,
Well, yeah. And even today, what do you do with a kid like that? I don't know. It would be difficult, wouldn't it?
So his father decides we're going to try something new. So they send him to Paris. This is his first time going to Paris. And he goes to Paris in 1875. He's 22 years old, to one of the other branches of this art merchant family. And he hates it. He hates the French. He hates Paris. And he hates the work there. Why? Because unlike in Holland and in England, he says, now this is pretty much almost quoting him, he says that the French consider art to be a commodity. It's just speculation for investment. They don't understand the spiritual aspect of art. And he gets fired, even though he's working for his uncle, because he starts lecturing the clients who come there to buy art that you're not supposed to buy art just because it's an investment in money. How can you understand anything if you don't understand the spirituality? Art is a connection to the cosmos, and I can just imagine this. I can just imagine the scene,
It would be hard, yeah. This is a time in France where there were a lot of very famous artists.
Oh, yeah.
This is like high time for the Salon, Monet, Manet, yeah.
Right, exactly. But he hasn't met any of these people yet. The irony is that, of course, a few years later he does, and it changes everything for him.
And a lot of these guys were struggling at the time to, you had to be in the salon to be sold and, to be bought. It was the start of the development of the business of art in France. And he didn't agree with it.
Well, he didn't agree with it, but also I suspect that the art that was being sold by his family was more conservative and old-fashioned.
Well, I mean, I'm just listening to a book right now called Paris is Burning about the story of the artists who thought that it was way too conservative and that they couldn't do anything to please the salon people who were too stuck in their way.
Absolutely.
In their ways.
In their ways. So we have the repetition. He gets fired. He's fired because they discover him basically discouraging these people from buying works because they're...
Yeah, that is not going to work. Yeah.
It's not. And guess what? He goes back to England.
Okay. Of his own accord. He makes a decision?
It's hard to know, but he loved England so much that he decides, and he goes back to England, not with the idea of working again in the art business, but of being a lay preacher.
Okay.
Okay, so he's back to his religious obsession. And this time...
bringing Christianity to England. Okay.
Yeah, but this is why I find this part interesting, is because he has a social conscience. And what happens is he goes to the very poor industrial parts of England where there are the miners, the people working in the factories, and these are the people he wants to be with. And not only does he start working, of course, as a preacher. I mean, you could just imagine him with a sack on his back, walking around, kind of like somebody going on the pilgrimage, going to these towns. But what he does is he develops an incredibly acute sense of the political situation and the misery of these people. But because this is Vincent van Gogh, who is not right in his head, instead of simply doing something constructive to help them, his empathy is enormous. But what he does is he decides he's going to live like them. So he stops pretty much eating, and he sleeps on a dirty floor in these houses with these miserable, very poor miners. And so the aspect of being a preacher is basically gets dissolved into this enormous bubble of empathy for the miserable on the earth. Basically, that's what happens. So.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a big jump because you told us at the beginning that he was from a well off family.
Yes, yes.
And to get down into that sort of lifestyle through empathy, I mean, that's great, but I don't know that it helps anyone.
No.
Like, it doesn't help him, but it doesn't help them either to have this guy just lying there.
You're right. And in fact, that's when he writes, my family doesn't understand the true values of the world. He puts all this down on paper, which is what's so fascinating, that the writing is more lucid than I guess he was basically somewhere in his spirit. So yes, the miners understood that he had a lot of empathy, but you're absolutely right. He wasn't doing anything to help them, really. He was just.
Well, he couldn't, other than bringing them salvation, which I'm sure he tried.
He tried, he tried.
But what else can you, like?
And just lying there and not eating. And every time from this point on that he goes into a crisis, he stops eating. He becomes, it's like an aesthetic, it's like San Martin in the desert or something, it's like he's punishing himself. It's very disturbing, all of this, it really is very, very disturbing.
Because it doesn't help you much if you don't, I mean, I will admit I eat too much, but if you eat too little, you're not well either.
No. So here is Vincent van Gogh. His family finds a way of getting him to go back to Holland.
Again, they intervene, yeah.
They intervene. He's 23 and a half years old. He goes to work in a bookstore and starts drawing again.
Okay.
He's still concerned with the Bible. He still does not eat. He decides he's going to be a vegetarian. He's not going to eat a lot. He eats one meal a day, all this kind of stuff. Well, there you are. He tries going back to another theological school. That does not work.
They probably find him too extreme, perhaps.
I'm sure that they do. And who knows if he's actually even coherent or not. It's hard to know, I mean, it's really hard to know. He knows his Bible backwards and forwards, but that doesn't mean that he's able to be a coherent person, because obviously part of being a preacher is to help other people, and I'm not sure if he's able to really help anybody but himself, This is part of.
He needs to help himself a little more even.
So all of this, we go through these in cycles. Poor Vincent, at the age of 27, he has not come out of this terrible cycle, this spiral of preacher, art merchant, bookstore, lost. He doesn't know what he wants to do. The only thing that is consistent.
And any more, like, love interest?
Not yet. That's going to come next.
Okay, so the first one really hit him hard.
The first one hit him hard. And so at the age of 27, it's already coming up, he goes back home to live in his parents' house. They give him a room. He says, I'm going to start doing some serious drawing and looking at painting. I can just imagine his parents going, okay, whatever, let's find you something that's kind of normal to do, whatever. And so he starts to work, but he hasn't yet really developed a painting style or anything like that. His father really discusses whether they should put him in a mental hospital for a while so that he can get some help, but they don't. So there he is, and he's home. And then he makes an announcement at the age of 27, back home in 1880. You have to imagine that we're talking about, he's only going to live another 10 years, right? I'm going to be an artist.
Okay, all right.
This is what he does. He actually makes this as a formal announcement. I am going to be an artist.
Which I'm sure his family thought, here we go again. Because he hadn't been successful at any of the last things he said he was going to do, so.
Yeah, and then again, I'm sure they were worried that it's going to be like, I'm going to be a preacher, I'm going to be this, it's going to be like this obsessive thing that's going to last a year or two. He enrolls in the art school in Brussels.
Very good.
He does a lot of drawing. In fact, he did thousands and thousands and thousands of drawings all his life. He actually started off in his life by really doing a lot of drawing. And he learned a lot of different techniques. And for the very first time, he tries his hand at painting.
Okay.
And he shares a studio with a Flemish artist. And that seems to be the great beginning of his new life. But, with Vincent van Gogh, there's always a but. He falls in love a second time.
Ah, okay. Here's the girl. Okay.
And he's rejected again. He wasn't bad looking. He was just weird, unfortunately for him. You know, I mean, just, what do you do when you're
And especially at that age, by then, a lot of the women his age are married already,
exactly?
and the ones who are not, they might be a bit wary of who they hook up with.
I know.
Yeah.
So he gets rejected again and he starts drinking,
Oh, that's going to solve everything. Mm-hmm.
and particularly a lot of absinthe,
Oh, okay. Even worse.
which puts holes in your brain.
I'm told, yes.
And this is the beginning of this starting to drink. And he does, in fact, spend the next years of his life, doing an enormous amount of drinking, which is all contradictory with everything else.
So this is like self-medication type of drinking?
I think that kind of drinking is to go into oblivion, to forget things, to feel sorry for yourself. That's the way I think about it. Oh, it's hard to know. It's not just drinking a glass of wine or two. If I understand it, absinthe really, it's like taking a drug, it just puts you into a sort of secondary state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So his father doesn't know what to do with him. They basically tell him, you can't stay here anymore. It's a sort of horribly pathetic story, this whole thing. And so his brother, Theo, who by this time has gone to work for the family art merchant business and is in Paris.
So he's much younger, right, Theo?
He's younger, but they were like 1, 2, there was a child a year for 6 years. So I guess he's like 6 years younger than him, right? So I guess he's just 21, really when he does it. And he's very together and he's very good at being a manager of an art merchant store, that kind of thing.
No mental illness, clearly, with Theo.
No, he's got his other problem, but we'll save that for a little bit later on. So Theo, who goes to Paris and who's really attached to this oldest brother, he says, okay, I'm going to take care of you. If you want to be an artist, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to give you enough money. This is his first idea. I'm going to give you enough money so that you can have some little place to live, not a whole lot, but enough place to live, have a little studio. And you don't have to worry about whether you work. Just do your art. It's like his brother is encouraging him to focus on being an artist, hoping that this will give him the strength to deal with the rest of life and the world.
That's really, really brilliant because a person like that, maybe that will work. Like, give him total freedom and just a safety net.
And just a safety net, right?
Do you, but don't go too low.
Don't go too low. And this is when it's interesting because we don't associate this, but you mentioned it earlier. At this time, all of his work is about the poor people, the miners, all of the people he spent these several years with. And so its work is very dark, very sober, very sad. And he produces an enormous amount of work. He really does. But it's nothing like what you see at the end of his life.
Right. I saw some. It was like some farm workers, and it's all in the grays and greens and browns and just really like, ooh.
He has one of the famous ones is the potato eaters, these people scrounging around for food. And he really produces.
So the themes were also, not just the colors were sad, but also the themes were very sad. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And he's taking out all of this in the work. And Theo takes all of his paintings and he says, okay. And he tries to start selling some of them. And he actually does sell a few of these paintings. But they are very traditional in style. There's nothing experimental in the painting. There's certainly no color in them other than these dark kind of, sad colors. But they are actually good paintings. It's just that they are really,
Now, did that come from Van Gogh himself, from within his soul, that he was depressed and so these are the colors he wanted to use? Or is this what was done at the time?
It was not what was done at the time, specifically, certainly not what was done at the time in France. But I think it shows the state of his soul, as you say, or his mind, and it reflects he wanted two of the artists he really admired were Millet, who's French, and Daumier, who is French, both of whom were going against the new style because they did very social painting about poor people, farmers, the people working the wheat in the fields. Their work is not quite as dim and dark I think that comes from Van Gogh in his brain. But he writes that these are the two artists that at this time he really admires
Okay.
because their work is social and it's about the condition of people, the poor people, and he wants people to pay attention to that. And he considers that the painting is going to be a way for people to pay attention. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, you don't get empathy by just looking at a painting, particularly,
Probably not. No.
So what happens is he actually has one of his uncles, maybe because the family's kind of supportive. I mean, and globally they were trying to be. One of his uncles commissions him to do a couple of works. But apparently, I couldn't find any of the details, but apparently the uncle was very specific what he wanted. And so Van Gogh did a few paintings and the uncle went, nah, this is not what I want, which is not going to help Vincent van Gogh in his head. So he tries again. He goes second round with a few more paintings. The uncle says, okay, never mind. I'll take them, but it's not really what I want. So he stops. He says, Theo decides that he's going to take on these works and he's going to try and sell them. But what it does, ironically, is it encourages Van Gogh to paint because he's getting what he thinks is a commission.
Uh-huh.
It's like, oh, even my uncle wants me to do some paintings for him, and Theo is able to sell a few paintings. So, okay, I guess I'm starting to be an artist,
Right. Well, because I suppose you are an author once you start selling enough to sustain yourself, and you are a painter once you start selling enough to sustain yourself. Podcaster, same,
Yeah. So it's helping him. So this is what happens. Theo says, from now on, I'm not going to just give you a stipend. Consider that every work you do, I am buying. So you are successful, in quotes, because you're selling your work, even if it's to me. And this, of course, is exactly what happens for the rest of his life, except for a few exceptions. Theo is the one who buys all of his work.
But didn't you say he made one piece a day sometimes?
Oh, that was the last 2 years of his life. Right in the last 2 years of his life. Yeah, he becomes like an obsessive robot in terms of turning.
A maniac, yeah.
A maniac. Yeah, I mean, he is, at that point, basically, unfortunately, that. So basically what happens is this is the beginning of Vincent van Gogh's life, more or less in connection to France. He becomes familiar because he spent some time in Paris. He hasn't yet established himself permanently in France. But because he's in Paris, first he hangs out with his brother. His brother doesn't really want him living with him, but he winds up getting him a room in Montmartre.
It was cheap back then, yeah.
It was certainly cheap. And Van Gogh is very, very comfortable in grungy, the bohemian kind of atmosphere that existed. Yeah.
Well, if you want absinthe and you want cheap, that's it.
He starts to see the work of all of the people that we know about, Toulouse-Lautrec, Monet. He doesn't meet them at that point yet. He hasn't really met them. But he sees their work, which gives him some new ideas,
In museums or?
Well, I think there are galleries and then they hang out in cafes. And I think at that time, this is before these works became millions of dollars, so they put their work up on the walls,
Well, we still see artists do that. Like you go to restaurants sometimes and they are featuring the work by someone.
Right.
That you can buy.
Exactly. And fascinating to me, and you will, of course, on top of everything else, appreciate this. Remember, he's fluent in French. He reads vociferously. It's hard for me to pronounce that word even in English. And he reads Balzac and Zola and Hugo. Why? And Dickens? Because their work is about the miserable of the earth.
Yeah.
About the poor people.
Well, a lot of literature at the time, that's what they were,
And so he's extremely well read. He's really very, very intellectual in that way. And it helps reinforce his interest in doing work that rejects, in his words, bourgeois values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he goes back to Holland. He's not yet it's only really the last 4 years that he's really French in that sense. He goes back to Holland. He gets a kind of studio. And this is where he does well over 200 paintings that include some of the darkest ones that are famous, like the weavers, the peasants in the fields. This is a body of work that is basically all about this. But because he's had more artistic training, he starts changing little by little the strokes of the paint, the perspective, he's trying new perspectives. And one of the things that influences him enormously, like some of the other artists, is that he also discovers Japanese art.
Yeah.
Like with Toulouse-Lautrec, the Japanesery is what he calls it, gives him an idea of how to show perspective in a different way. So little by little, these outside things are coming to an influence in his work, even though for the moment he hasn't moved into the bright colors.
Yeah.
Guess what happens?
Another woman?
Another woman.
Oh, dear.
1884.
Okay. Did that go better?
No. This one, sadly enough, looks like it was reciprocal.
Oh.
He fell in love with the daughter of a neighbor, and both parents forced them to separate because they said he was crazy.
Well, yeah.
She tried to commit suicide.
Oh.
So clearly there was a problem. And then what happens is his father suddenly dies,
Oh, that's not going to help anything, is it?
and his oldest sister tells him to leave.
Oh, because, but at that point he was in Holland.
He was in Holland, and it was like, we can't deal with you. So this is the really last of these major events in terms of women that is really a problem, because in the meantime, he's taken up with prostitutes at different moments. I mean, he has relationships with women, but a little bit the kind that are weird and edgy,
Look, if you are a itinerant preacher at some point in your life, taking up with prostitutes later, it doesn't agree. There's going to be some problems in your head.
Dissonance.
Dissonance. Yes.
Yeah, well, we're in major dissonance here, So he gets kicked out of his house.
Yeah, and there were probably a lot of family dynamics that we haven't even touched on. But if your father keeps rescuing you, the other kids are gonna not enjoy that.
And then this is when he finally goes back to France.
Well, he doesn't have a choice, does he?
No.
Yeah.
Has no choice. Theo says, you can't stay with me. I will set you up in a studio in Montmartre. And that is what happens. And this is when he meets and makes friends with, and some of them really do become his friends, with Monet, with an artist named Émile Bernard, with Pissarro, who winds up being one of his closest friends. Now, Pissarro is older than him. He's 20 years older, and he is the father of Impressionism. He takes Vincent van Gogh under his wing and helps him enormously. He meets Toulouse-Lautrec, and Toulouse-Lautrec becomes a friend of his. Toulouse-Lautrec, I imagine, knowing as much as I do about him, identifies with his misery in a different kind of way, you see. He knows Seurat, who is the one who invented pointillism. He eventually meets Paul Gauguin. It's a little bit later, but he meets and becomes friends with and hangs out with all of these artists. And several of them really encourage him. Émile Bernard is an artist you probably don't know well, but he's an artist who did what is called divisionism, which is, but he painted, it wasn't really Impressionism, but he did a lot of work that's kind of interesting, and he would put these black outlines around the figures. It's kind of cute. It's not my favorite style, but they all were developing new techniques and styles, and he actually enjoys it. He enjoys being with them. He is learning a huge amount, and this is when he decides that it's possible to try new techniques, to try using brighter colors. He spends 2 years in Paris.
Did the other artists kind of help him try new things?
Toulouse-Lautrec did.
Okay.
And Pissarro did. And Pissarro, who really becomes like another father figure to him. He has him come out to live with him in Auvers-sur-Oise, which is where eventually he winds up. Pissarro has a son who becomes his best friend for a while. He shows him how to lighten up the palette of his paint, of painting outside, which he had never really done before. He'd always gone back into the studio to paint. So he has a huge influence on him. And even though Van Gogh has a distinctive style of his own, and his paint is thicker than Pissarro's, who's very light and almost translucent, Pissarro is really one of the major figures in helping him figure out a style of his own and how he can lighten up his palette, use some different strokes, be a little bit less dense in the work. And between him, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Émile Bernard, these are the three artists who really are the closest to him at the time. Monet knows him, but he actually enjoys his work, but he's not, I think, one of the closest people to him. But all of these people help open him up to new ideas and new techniques. And he produces a huge amount of work in these 2 years. He does watercolor, he does drawing, he does a lot of painting, but he hates Paris.
Still, he hates Paris.
He hates Paris. He loves these artists. And his dream, absolute dream, is to go someplace, number one, where the light is different, which is, of course, what brings him to the south of France. But the other thing he wants, because he still has this social idea in his head, what he wants more than anything else is to create an artist colony and have many artists come and live in the same place and work together in helping each other by looking at each other's work. So after 2 years, he says, and this is his term, he's going to follow his Mediterranean dream.
Okay. I didn't realize he had one.
He had one.
Okay.
I didn't realize he had one either. I didn't know that that was actually what got him to go to Arles. He was told by a lot of these artists that this was where the light was incredible, where there was a brilliance to the sun. And actually, he was right. The light and everything in the south means you use bright colors. You're not going to use dark, sad colors. You're just going to be involved in this brightness and lightness. I mean, the artists that came well after him, like Matisse, are people who were inspired by all of this as well. So he makes a bunch of these artists promise, of course, this includes Paul Gauguin, that they will come down and visit him and spend time painting with him in the south.
Okay. Sounds good.
And so he leaves Paris.
And at this point, he has money because, I mean, to establish a colony of painters, you need some money, right? For renting a place or something?
Well, he doesn't really. He has enough to sustain him, but Theo, I don't know how much actually Theo gave me.
He's on the edge all the time.
He's on the edge. He's on the edge. And the other problem is, it's also his, I was going to say his taste, but it's not even that. When he, for instance, he gets to Arles. Arles, I know a little. I don't know it super well, but I know it a little. Okay, so he goes into the oldest, grungiest part of Arles where the hookers are. He doesn't, he doesn't go to the nice part of Arles. He goes into the old wall part, which is fine. I mean, we're talking about 150 years, almost 150 years ago. But even so, I mean, he doesn't go to a part which is nice and quiet and whatever. He goes to the equivalent of a grungy part of Montmartre in Paris. He feels comfortable there. He feels comfortable with the people sitting around drinking absinthe, with the people smoking opium and pipes, with the hookers on the street. And this is where he rents this famous yellow house, which becomes one of the most iconic of his paintings, because there's a whole series of paintings. And he rents a series of rooms in this house called the Yellow House. And he decides that that's where the artist colony is going to be. I mean, he's delusional, basically.
Well, yeah, grandeur. Like he has big vision of, again, one of these projects. Like, I want to be a preacher, like, yeah.
But it is literally where Van Gogh becomes the brilliant Van Gogh that we all know. Okay.
Yeah.
It is here with the light and with this fabulous palette of pure color, no longer mixing with black, no longer making grays and browns, He has beautiful cerulean blues. He has beautiful yellows. He has mauves. He has all these pure colors right out of the tube that he begins to paint. And he paints and paints and paints and paints. And he does drawings and he paints. And what does he paint? He paints the house, the yellow house. There's paintings of it from every angle you can imagine on the outside. His idea is that some of these paintings he's going to give to Theo to sell, and some of them he's going to use to decorate the house to inspire other artists when they come. He paints the shoes. He did this whole series of his shoes. The famous painting of his bedroom with, all of these. I mean, basically, the subject matter is the most mundane imaginable. But he makes these brilliant paintings. And he does this beginning of the sunflowers there as well, And one night, he goes out and he does the very first of his starry nights over the Rhone. This is a gorgeous one. He did a whole series of starry nights, but this one is the first one. And you see the reflection of the swirls, he's beginning his swirls over the Rhone River. And he produces probably a painting a day the whole time that he's there. And just absolutely.
That is amazing because, I mean, there's a lot of paint on this canvas, just applying that much paint.
And he luckily had the money to buy the paints, you see, because at this time, nobody's really making their own paints anymore. People are actually buying paint.
In tubes, right? The tubes have come out, yeah.
Right. Oil paint is really in tubes, And he really has this incredible artistic breakthrough. This is the Van Gogh that we all are baba in front of,
And was he happy?
No, he was never happy. That's the saddest thing about this whole story is that this man was never, ever happy. So he does all of this, and then he keeps writing back to all of his friends in Paris. When are you coming down? When are you coming to Arles? And for some reason, he has a fixation on Paul Gauguin, who is an arrogant son of a bitch, even though I like some of his painting, and who actually kind of hung out with him but didn't really like him. And why he decides to go down to join him, I don't know. Was it because he was just getting all these letters, because he was, harassing him?
Maybe he was curious.
Maybe he was curious. But the problem is that Van Gogh, who of course is still hanging out with hookers and is still drinking all this absinthe all the time, he thinks that Gauguin is going to come down and stay and help him create this artist colony. And so after a while, Gauguin shows up, they start to paint together, and they immediately start to fight with each other. Now, are they fighting with each other because they're both drinking a lot? I can't even say. I have no idea. The number of works that Van Gogh did while he was in Arles are just absolutely astounding. I mean, I just put it in the notes, some of them, because these are the ones that everybody can picture in their minds. The bedroom, the night cafe, the starry nights, the sunflowers, the shoe series, the yellow house series. I mean, the chair series. All of these things, he produced like a maniac the whole time that he was there.
And really, really significant, like different, very personal kind of, by that point, that's all him. Like nobody else paints like that.
Nobody did before, and nobody has literally since. And the swirls begin, this thick impasto of paint, but with the swirls, with the touches. I've spent so many years of my life painting. When I look at the paintings, I can feel his hand movement, It's like I can almost imagine him with this gesture with his arms and his hands moving around. But of course, the euphoria kind of dissipates after a while. He drinks a lot. He's not eating much. He's into this total, up period of this euphoria. His brother starts really worrying about him. And then Paul Gauguin shows up in September. This is in 1888, okay? He spends 3 months with him. The witnesses said that they basically fought all the time. They would get drunk. They would fight with each other. Eventually, I think Gauguin probably told him what he really thought about him and the situation. I don't know why Gauguin actually ever went there, because he apparently didn't like him particularly as a human being. It's just pretty awful, the whole thing, considering how fragile Van Gogh was. And so he left. He announces one day in December of 1888 that he's leaving. That's all.
Right.
They have one huge drunken fight, and Gauguin picks up his stuff and leaves, never sees him again, of course. And it's the next day that Van Gogh cuts his ear. Now, the story is he cut his ear off. He didn't cut his entire ear off, but of course he did a self-mutilation. He cut off a part of his ear. He actually cut it off, put it in a handkerchief, and he was probably delirious at this point between the whatever mental state he was in and having so much to drink that he literally sat there with this piece of his ear wrapped up until they found him the next day. And he was bleeding, of course, so he was treated by the doctors, and they contacted his brother, and his brother said, no, wait, this can't continue. And it's at this point, at the very beginning of 1889, that they decide that he has to go into a psychiatric hospital, and they sent him to Saint-Rémy de Provence.
Right. I mean, if you cut your ear off, he's already done quite a bit of self-harm, like with his not eating,
right,
his drinking excessively. That's all self-harm as well.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that he accepts it. See, so he's really delusional. They said he was having hallucinations. He was incoherent. I mean, it's a major, major, major mental breakdown that he has. The fact that Gauguin did him more damage than anybody else that ever happened in his life. It was just a terrible situation.
Well, it was just another hard breakup.
Yeah.
It was with a man. It was not a romantic thing, but he lived through it like a breakup.
Absolutely. It was a total rejection, and of course an artistic rejection as well, in a sense, right?
That's true. That's even worse.
It's even worse. So they take him to Saint-Rémy and they lock him up.
Sure. I mean, if he's going to hurt himself, that's what you need to do.
So he's given 2 rooms. This is the part I really didn't know that much about in terms of detail. It made me cry, literally reading it. Now, they give him 2 rooms. One he uses as a studio, but he's really locked up. They allow him to walk out. There are gardens that are basically gated gardens, and he spends a year, yeah, in Saint-Rémy.
And he's working, right?
And he's working every single day. And he does more of the series of Starry Nights. They get swirlier and swirlier and swirlier. He paints what he can see out of the windows that are barred. He paints what he can see from the gardens. And he doesn't even complain. He's just there. And he paints and he paints and he draws and he paints. And he produces some of the works that are the most beautiful and the most famous that we will ever see.
But at this point, hopefully he is sober mostly.
He's mostly sober, and I don't know what kind of treatment, but he calms down.
Right, right. If he's sober and maybe they put some food into him at times.
Probably, and they probably gave him some kind of whatever drugs you can give to somebody to calm them down. This is when he also starts doing the beautiful bouquets. He did hundreds and hundreds of paintings of bouquets, of irises, of all these flowers. He paints the wheat fields.
They are gorgeous.
They're gorgeous, right? The wheat fields. He can see the wheat fields surrounding Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. He paints nature. And he does a little bit of work from memory of the, going back a little bit to the miners and the earlier work. It's interesting.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's like he has a nostalgia for that period of his life. But of course, like in Arles, he produces, nobody knows exactly how many works. I mean, probably more than one a day. I mean, just, an enormous amount of work.
None of these canvases are huge, right?
No.
He works on maybe what?
It's what the French would call a format raisin, which is basically not even quite a meter in width. It's probably about, well, I don't even know anymore because I'm confused in my brain between inches and meters, but it's portable. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's portable, So he can actually take the easel into the garden. He doesn't have to be in the room. He does get allowed to go out, but always accompanied by somebody.
And it's interesting that, as far as I know, he never painted the Roman ruins, which are pretty much across the street.
Aglanum. No, never.
And that would be interesting to paint, wouldn't it?
It would be very interesting to paint, yes.
Maybe for some reason he wasn't allowed in there?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's also possible that they were in such bad condition at the time. Now it's, of course, a tourist attraction.
Well, that's true.
It's, who knows?
Or like he didn't paint the market of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, which is famous by now?
No, I don't think they'll let him go.
Perhaps not.
I don't think so. He did a lot of that in Arles.
Because that is kind of 2-3 kilometers away. Yeah, it's not right there.
It's not right there.
Because at the time, the asylum was outside of the town. Not a far outside of the town, but outside a bit. And by now, it's overgrown. The town has...
Yeah.
But I don't know that he painted the market or...
I don't think so. He did the wheat fields. This is when he starts doing, of course, again, a lot of the paintings that I think are so beautiful of the wheat fields. He does lots and lots of the Starry Sky series, flowers,
Which are to me, the sunflowers and the Starry Night are the striking ones. When you see Starry Night for real life, it's almost a spiritual experience. It's almost like you have never looked at the sky that way, and yet the sky is always there.
Yeah.
And then it shows you a facet of nature that you hadn't ever thought of like that. And so it's like it opens up a new reality. It makes you look in a direction where you wouldn't have yourself.
It's interesting. It's the swirls that get to me in those paintings. And I think of it as the spiritual. It's like connecting to some spirit up in the sky. To me, that's what happens when I look at those paintings. I see them as just the movement of his hand. It's not just the sky that he's painting. He's painting some connection to something cosmic. Basically,
it is very cosmic. Yeah.
It's very, very cosmic, So our dear Vincent van Gogh, he spends exactly 1 year in Saint-Rémy, and in May of 1890, he is released.
Okay, so hopefully he's healthier now.
They say he's healthier, he's more lucid, he's calmer, and his brother arranges for him to go to Auvers-sur-Oise.
Which is quite a distance. It's a little bit west of Paris.
It's west of Paris, right? And the reason he wants him to go there is because, number one, that's where Pissarro lives, and they are very close, really very close.
Ah, yes, yes.
And there's a man named Dr. Gachet,
Right, which he painted actually. Yeah.
who he painted, exactly. And Dr. Gachet is a doctor who has treated several artists. He's not a psychiatrist, but he's a doctor who has treated several artists who have mental problems, let's put it that way, and is an amateur painter. And so he has a lot of friends who are painters, and Theo decides that this is the man who can communicate with Vincent because he knows how to talk to a painter. He knows how to talk about art and about painting, and he's sensitive to the spirit of an artist.
They can talk shop.
They can talk shop, and he can communicate with him in terms of what the painting is for him. So it's therapeutic. Gachet rents him some rooms in his house in Auvers-sur-Oise. And Theo moves to Auvers-sur-Oise. He has just gotten married, by the way, Theo, to a woman who's been his girlfriend for a long time. They got married a little bit before because he has a son very soon after that. And so he's surrounded by people that love him and that take care of him and are worried about him. But we never know what happens. We don't know exactly what happened because he seemed to be better. He seemed to be calm. He arrives in Auvers-sur-Oise in May. He paints, goes out in the fields. He paints a lot. This is where he does most of the big wheat fields. And I have to say, I discovered one that I don't think I had seen before that I just think is just absolutely marvelous. And it's this incredible saturated yellow on the bottom and these blues and greens of the sky on top. And it's just with these strokes of paint. And he spends all his days out in the fields painting, and he paints Dr. Gachet, and he paints the people sitting in the cafe. This is a big portrait period of his life, as well as the wheat fields. And he paints one finished painting per day, besides doing the watercolors and the drawings.
That's manic. Like, it's too much. You would exhaust yourself.
On the 27th of July of the same year, 70 days after he arrives in Auvers-sur-Oise, he goes out into the field where he has been painting, and he shoots himself in the chest.
I thought it was in the stomach.
No, in the chest. Well, chest. It says chest. I don't know if you know exactly. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's not, this is what's so strange. The wound is not so bad that he is lying there. He literally, where did he get the gun? I have no idea. Nobody even knows why. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. He walks back to the house.
Yeah, I think it was because if he had shot himself in the heart or something, it would be dead.
He goes back to the house and he's bleeding, and he tells Dr. Gachet, I just shot myself. And so they call Theo and Pissarro, and they get to try to treat him medically. But for whatever reason, whatever the injury is, it gets infected. And 2 days later, he dies.
That is so sad. That is so sad.
His last words to his brother are, the sadness will last forever. I just got goosebumps. He was so profoundly, deeply sad as a human being, and yet he was so incredibly creative and so sensitive to other people. His funeral was attended by all the artists that knew him, by a whole bunch of other people, by his family. His brother, of course, had his paintings. A few of them have been sold.
The thing is, if you have a person like that in your family, which I don't, but I can imagine that it would be really, really hard to deal with. Like, how do you handle a person like that?
You can only do so much. You can only do so much, and afterwards, there's nothing you can do. Yeah.
Yeah, eventually he's going to take matters into his own hands, and unfortunately, that's how it ended.
No one will ever know why at that particular moment what was going wrong, because he wasn't in love again. He was painting. It was as if everything was going smoothly.
But, it must have been so painful to be in his head.
Yeah.
Being that sensitive and with that sort of perception, yeah, I don't think he could take it anymore.
No, I don't think so.
And it was mostly because of the way he perceived the world, the way he was.
That's mental illness, really.
Yeah.
So he's buried in Auvers-sur-Oise, and then what happens is that his brother Theo, strangely enough, dies within a year of syphilis.
Oh, so he also died very young.
He died very young. He had a little son, His widow remarried, and she married another artist. And in 1914, she has Theo, who's been buried elsewhere, transferred to be buried next to his brother in Auvers-sur-Oise. And so they are side by side in the little cemetery in Auvers-sur-Oise. And she wrote later on and said, this was the way they both would have wanted it to be. Yeah.
And she inherited a lot of these paintings, right?
Yes. And she sold. I mean, she was fair, but she did, of course, she managed most of the work, the estate,
Was it immediate that he became a popular artist?
It was soon after. Yes, because one of the things I forgot to mention was that the year before he died, 10 of his works were shown in the independent show for painters in Paris.
Uh-huh.
And who, of all people, said his work was best to show? Monet.
Well, yeah.
So there you are. He got
Recognition at last.
recognition from Monet. He was defended ferociously by Toulouse-Lautrec and Pissarro and Émile Bernard. And there was some Belgian painter who insulted his work and said it was crap. And Toulouse-Lautrec and Pissarro basically said, they wrote a piece in a newspaper, the Mercure de France, and they said that this guy didn't know what he was doing and that Van Gogh's work was brilliant and he was a genius. And they all agreed that this was the work of a genius. And this was within a year before he died.
Right. But I don't know that it would have made any difference if he had been recognized to be a genius before he decided to take his own life. Well, of course, he didn't know he was taking his own life when he was doing it. That's the crazy thing is, yeah.
Probably not. Well, who knows? I mean, he was into it's like self-punishment. Cutting your ear is self-punishment,
Yeah. Self-harm, yeah.
Who knows what possessed him to go out? I mean, we will never know. But it was beginning to have recognition. And within a generation, he was recognized as a genius because he influenced a whole bunch of the artists that came pretty much just right after that. The artists that went into pointillism, that went into fauvism and all of these things.
Oh, everybody, yeah.
Everybody,
Well, and the crazy thing is he wasn't happy with the art, the business of art, and then his work became the essence of business of art, like
50, 60 million per painting. I mean, this is you're absolutely right. This is the absolute irony of it all. His heritage in terms of production, these are numbers that are even hard for me to grasp. He left over 2,000 works. 2,000. Painting, drawing. He drew his entire life. He never stopped drawing. I don't know a lot of his drawings. I'd love to know where they are, actually, except in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, which has everything, Yeah. Watercolors. In 10 years, he produced over 1,000 works. And his heritage is absolutely enormous. The Japanese have a huge amount of his work. The Americans have a huge number of his works in all of the museums. Of course, Amsterdam has the beautiful Van Gogh Museum, which is devoted exclusively to him. How ironic of all things, The wing in the Orsay Museum. I mean, you recognize his work. It's not like anybody else's.
Yeah, he's really, really unique. And he's left a big imprint on the art world and on a lot of people. I really think he's touched a lot of people. You cannot be
indifferent
to what he did. Like, you cannot. And as a young person, back when I put up posters in my bedroom, I often had a Van Gogh poster.
You did?
Yes. And then you change bedrooms and you try to take it down and it rips.
You know what? For this podcast, I would love to have people not only just comment about the podcast and stuff, but I'd love to find out what people like about his work and have everybody out there, when you listen to this, write back to us and tell us which of his works do you like and how do you react to his painting? I would love to hear that from people.
Yeah. Elyse, this is probably the longest episode we've ever recorded. We have to stop.
This has just been so moving.
But he's a genius, like nobody else before, maybe someday, but amazing. An amazing artist. So thank you very much, Elyse, for bringing him into our reality.
Well, thank you, Annie, for suggesting Van Gogh.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2025 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.